Good everybody. We're studying Parashas Mitzvah Vayeilekh, and I want to start from the second parasha, Vayeilekh. And just in case there's some people who are not going to be here on Wednesday when we study Nitzavim, Parashas Vayeilekh has two mitzvahs in it, and the last mitzvah in the Torah is in it. And so I wanted to spend some time going over that mitzvah because the mitzvah that's very near and dear to my heart, that is the mitzvah of to write a Sefer Torah. To write a Torah scroll. And so for this reason, I wanted to spend a few minutes on it with you. So let's go to chapter 31, verse 19. And this is the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. It says in the verse, V'ata kitvu lachem et hashira azot. Now you shall write for yourselves this shira, this song, and v'lamda et bnei Israel, and you shall teach it to the children of Israel. Sima bifi, and place it in their mouths. Aman tiali ashira azot le'ed b'nei Israel. So this shall be for me. This song shall be as an aid, as a testimony for all of the children of Israel. So just before we go to some of the commentaries on this, I want to first read the Rashi. Always we go look at the Rashi. And Rashi says here in chapter 31, verse 19, Et Hashira Azot. Rashi says that this does not refer to the mitzvah of writing the whole Torah. He says that this song specifically refers to Hazinu Hashemayim, the next passage in the Torah, which is the passage of Hazinu, Ad v'chiper ad mato. So Rashi says this is specifically a commandment about Hazinu. But the Gemara doesn't understand it that way. The Gemara to Sanhedrin, I mean, Rashi obviously knows the Gemara, and he's just saying that maybe just literally on a textual level refers to the next verse. The Gemara expands it to say as follows: V'ata kitvu lachem et hashira azot, Amar Rabba. Rabba taught, Af al pi she'nichu lo avosav la'adam sefer Torah, even though a person's father or his ancestors left him a Torah scroll, mitzvah l'chtov mishelo. There is a mitzvah, there's a commandment to write your own Torah scroll. As it says, V'ata kitvu lachem et hashira. Now you shall write for yourselves this commandment, this song. So we see from here that there's a specific mitzvah to write a Torah scroll, even though you have one in your house. Even though you own already a Torah scroll, each person has a special commandment to write their own Torah scroll. And we're going to go into the text of the Gemara in a few moments. But first, I want just to read some of the commentary on this statement from the Gemara. Hold on one second. Just give me 1 second. Everybody just give me 1 second. I continue here by reading what the Talmud says about explicitly. The Talmud discusses it in the second chapter of Sanhedrin with respect to the commandment which we had in last week's portion of a king to write his own Torah scroll. We had this in Parshas Kiseitze. So it says, meaning to say, the king is commanded not to write his own Torah scroll. He's not allowed to just take glory in the Torah scroll that he got from his fathers. He needs to write a new Torah scroll. And says Rabbah, in that context, the Torah tells us that each person is obligated to write their own Torah scroll, but the mitzvah is not to have a Torah scroll, but to write their own Torah scroll. Even though your forefathers left you a Torah scroll, mitzvah l'chtov mishlo. It's a mitzvah to write your own. And as it says, "V'ata kitvu lachem et hashira azot." You shall write for yourself this song. And write for yourself implies that means to say that it has to be from you. So the Nachmanides points out from the fact that it says kisvu, and it means to write, that it's the specific holiness of writing it. Now, all the commentaries point out that even though the context of this verse is clearly, literally speaking about the next song, which is the Song of Azinu, Maimonides writes in Laws of Sefer Torah, that chapter 7, law 1, that we shouldn't say that you should just write this Song of Azinu, because you can't just write Hazinu. It's not possible to write the Torah scroll one parsha and that's it. Rather, says Maimonides that the interpretation of the verse is to write the Torah which has this song in it. Meaning to say you have to write the Torah which has the song of Hazinu. So the whole purpose why we have to write the Torah is so that we have the song of Hazinu. And the Shagas Aryeh proves that you can't say that the intent is just to write Azinu, whereas the rest of the Torah is only to he disagrees. You can't just say that the rest of the Torah is just to allow for the possibility of writing Azinu, but rather it's because since it's impossible to say that you can't just write Azinu on its own, it's obviously the case that you have to write the entire Torah. And so that's the upshot. That's the upshot of this verse. So this is what the text of the Talmud says. And we go to some of the commentaries. We'll come back to the Torah Ferach, but this is what some of the commentaries say, that even though the Maharsha and Nedarim explains that if we were commanded to write this song, just a passage of Azinu to testify about the Torah, then for sure we're commanded to write the entire Torah ourselves, because that's an even greater testimony. And the Rav Mecklenburg in the Ketava Kabbalah explains that it's like you compare it to a sick person. So basically, that you just write him like the just a little bit, and he knows to take all of the medicine and the entire course. You don't write the whole course. So the Radbaz says that we see that this verse says "V'kitvu lachem et hashira azot," that the word shira contains within it the words yashar, straight, and the Torah is called the Sefer HaYashar, and so therefore this is also a hint of the fact that you're supposed to write the entire Torah. There's a controversy whether or not you can fulfill this mitzvah even without writing the Torah. So some say that they point to a commentary of the Rosh, that the Rosh and Sefer HaChinuch seem to say that there's a mitzvah nowadays, but that's in addition to writing a Torah scroll, since one of the purposes of this mitzvah is in order to study Torah. Now, why do we have to write our own Torah scroll? Because it helps us to study Torah. We have a Torah scroll around us. And so therefore, nowadays there's an additional mitzvah to buy holy books, to buy Chumashim and Mishnayos and the Talmud and their commentaries in order to study them with your family and with your children, because the mitzvah, the essence of the mitzvah of a Torah scroll is to study from it. Now, most people today, they write their Torah scroll and then they leave it in a synagogue and they don't actually study from it because it'll get ruined. So they study from books. And so therefore, by studying the Gemara and the commentaries and the Chumash, then we'll know all the laws. So some people say that this is the Rosh and the Chinuch, that in addition to the mitzvah of writing a Torah scroll, we have another aspect of it. But it does not obviate the need for writing a Torah scroll and acquiring a Torah scroll and participating in the mitzvah of getting a Torah scroll. So the question is, do people do this or not? So most people don't do it. I have to say that it's really disappointing to me, because this is a mitzvah that's transformed my life and given me so much spiritual connection to Hashem that I wish more people would take this mitzvah upon themselves. And it's very, up until 5 years ago, I never picked up a quill. And now I'm about, God willing, thank God, Baruch Hashem, close to finishing my 8th Torah scroll, probably sometime in the next month. I'll finish my 8th. And it just shows you that it's anybody, really, I believe that with all my heart, if I can do this, anybody could do it. And it just shows you that the mitzvah is very doable. It's a mitzvah to write a Torah scroll. It's the last mitzvah of the Torah. This is our responsibility as a Jew. So the idea of writing a Torah scroll is not a segregated task for somebody who's a scribe. Many of our great rabbis in the past themselves wrote the Torah scroll, their own Torah. The Rambam writes, in Maimonides himself writes in chapter 9 from Hilchos Sefer Torah, he wrote, Sefer Torah shekasavtiv ani, the Torah scroll that I wrote. And Rameir Alevi Abulafia also says he wrote himself. And the Meiri brings down that Rameir Alevi Abulafia wrote 2 Sifrei Torah. And he says, V'chein katavtia b'shnei Sifrei Torah shekatavti la'atzmi. He says, the 2 Torah scrolls that I wrote for myself. And this could be in addition to Torah scrolls that he wrote for other people. The Agos Maimonios, he was a commentary on the Rambam who lived in the Ashkenazi lands. He brought down, Hinei ani asiti b'sefer Torah shekatavti. He also wrote a Torah scroll. And the Meiri himself, the Menachem Meir Meiri, lived in Perpignan in the 14th century. He says, the Kvar shtalti b'ksivot sefer Torah b'gvil v'lo nizdaminli. He said, basically, he tried to write a Torah scroll. He didn't have the opportunity. So he says, and the Baal Migdalos, who wrote a commentary on the Rambam, he says he wrote a Torah scroll. The Radvaz brings down as follows. He says, Shuv ra'iti b'Torah shebechtav shekasav Rabbeinu Shem Tov Gaon Baal Migdalos. So that's another commentary. It was written by the Torah. Rabbeinu Tam himself, we know Rabbeinu Tam, who is the grandson of Rashi, he wrote a scroll for himself. He wrote a Megillah. He wrote Megillah at Esther for himself. The Ravya, who's Rav Avram ben Yoel Levi, he was a Germanic Tosafist in the 12th century. He wrote that he himself wrote a Megillah. Also the Rokeach. The Rokeach was a Germanic Tosafist, or a Tosafist. He was Rebbe Lezer of Worms. He wrote a commentary on prayer, and he says that he said that in the eulogy that he wrote for his wife, who was killed in the Crusades, he writes that he had 40 Torah scrolls, and he writes in this that my wife was very exacting with all of them, and she sewed them. She sewed together like 40 different Torah scrolls, which is itself a question, because this is the Rokeach. He's, by the way, the origin of the commentary on prayer is done by the Rokeach, and he says his wife sewed together 40 Torah scrolls. But here, actually, we know that this is a question because there's the Kesed HaSofer, who is the author of the person who wrote the Kesed HaSofer. That's the work on the Shulchan Aruch. The work on the laws of writing, and he writes down in his law of who's allowed to write a Torah scroll. He says as follows. He says, I'm going to pull this up. What does he say here? Anyway, he says it's inappropriate for a woman to write the Torah scroll. Not for sure not to write it, but he says it's inappropriate even to sew it together. So that's a question. How could the Rokeach's wife, now the author of the Kesed is writing 600-700 years later, but he refers back to the Kesed, says that a woman shouldn't do it. So I don't know what he would say about that Rokeach, who's obviously comes way before him. Here, let me see if I can find it in the Kesed. Oh, here we go. Here he says, Kol shepasel l'kos, one pasel b'kol tikun asiyasan. Anybody who's disqualified to write it can't do any part of it. And they should not have, and he says, he writes as follows, that you need to be careful that they shouldn't do any aspect of it through a woman. But we see from here that the Rokeach, who came 600-700 years before him, was okay with his wife sewing together the Torah scrolls. So just putting that down there for everybody to consider. Also, my brother showed me a picture in the Orthodox synagogue in Portland, Maine, that when they had a new Torah scroll in the 1950s, they had all the women of the community gathered together on the bima and sew the Torah together. So there is a tradition of women sewing the Torah, even though the author of the cassette, Rabbi Shlomo Ganzfried, is the author of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, he is not in favor of that. So now the question is, how come so many people today don't fulfill this mitzvah, even though they're very pious Jews and they have the opportunity to fulfill this mitzvah? How come they don't do it? So the Sefer Hasidim writes, who's the Sefer Hasidim? Sefer Hasidim is actually around the same time as the Rokeach, Rabbi Yehuda Achasid, a little bit earlier, and Sefer, it's a pietistic work written for the Germanic Jews, and he writes that because before you write Sefer Torah scrolls, you have to make sure that you give clothing to the poor. So you have to, there's priorities. You're not always able to do every mitzvah. So, and then there are other opinions. The Chai Adam says supporting Torah study comes before writing of a Torah scroll, because we know that you're allowed to sell a Torah scroll so that you can go to yeshiva and study Torah. And so, and the Chai Adam, so he's Rav Avram Danzig, he argues and he says it's not like the people who say that the writing of the Torah scroll, there's no mitzvah greater than it, and that if you do it, if you do that mitzvah alone, you acquire olam haba, world to come. And he disagrees. But these are lone voices. The majority of people say that the Torah scroll is writing the Torah scroll is something that should be prioritized as a mitzvah. The Shagas Aryeh gives a different reason. He says his explanation is really disturbing, but he says since we're not 100% sure of the text, therefore we can't really fulfill this mitzvah properly, because we don't know like exactly some of the words, how they're spelled, and so therefore we're not fulfilling the mitzvah. But that's, again, if you say that would mean that we don't have any kosher Torah scrolls at all today. So these are some lone voices, but the majority of the opinions are that this is a mitzvah that everybody needs to engage in, and that's why the great rabbis of the past wrote Torah scrolls like Rambam and as we saw in Yad Ramah, etc. The Sefer Yesod Shorosh V'Avoda writes that if you fulfill this mitzvah, then you will be blessed with a long life. And so we see from here, because it says, what's his proof for this? Because it says about a king that if he does this, king has to write 2 Torah scrolls. So, and why? So he says, because it says that the king will do 2 Torah scrolls, and one of them be like everybody else, so they'll be blessed with a long kingdom. So you see from here that the mitzvah of writing a Torah scroll is connected to this idea of being blessed with a long life. So nowadays, along with the custom of writing a Torah scroll, is the idea of writing new Torah commentaries. To write if you have new insights in the Torah, it's a mitzvah to write them down and to share them with people. So this is the idea of included within the mitzvah of writing a Torah scroll, according to Sefer Hasidim. The Meiri writes that writing down new ideas is one of the purposes of our existence. Meaning to say, not only if you are one of the greatest people of the generation, but everybody should write down their ideas and their new insights, because when we write it down, we're putting new ideas out in the world, and that's pushing us forward. And the Zohar Kodesh writes that from the day the temple was destroyed and the sacrifices were canceled, then all that God has left is studying the words of the Torah. and the words of the Torah that are created anew in our mouths. So that's what God does. God studies the words of the Torah that the new words of the Torah that we create when we discuss new ideas, the ideas of being created. So if we look at it like this, we're saying the very last mitzvah of the Torah is to write our Torah, write our own Torah. But it doesn't just mean to write our own Torah. It means to create new words of Torah from the Torah, to create new ideas from the Torah. That's the very last mitzvah of the Torah. And the Zohar and the Midrash Shochar Tov says that if a person sins, he should bring a sacrifice. But since he can't bring a sacrifice anymore, what he should do is he should write down in the book everything that he learned, and that will be like an offering in place of his offering of his soul. And that's what it says, Ona nafshi, in place of that'll be in place of a sacrifice. You'll write down your words. Also, the Machzor Vitri writes as follows. The Machzor Vitri. What is the Machzor Vitri? The Machzor Vitri was a work attributed to 11th century northern France, the Germanic lands, and it was basically like the family Bible that they kept it close, kept a lot of minhagim, a lot of customs. So the Machzor Vitri writes in the laws of circumcision here. Catch this one, April. The Machzor Vitri writes that it's a custom after circumcision, very close, soon after, that they should gather together 10 men, and they should take a Bible, and the baby should be in the baby boy should be in the crib, and he should be dressed like he was dressed on the day of his circumcision, and they put the chumash on top of him, and they wave it over him, and they say, let this person fulfill that which is written in this. And then they take on that day, right after he's had his bris, they take a inkwell and a quill, and they place it in his hand so that he should merit to be a scribe and advanced in the study of Torah. So they put his quill in his hand. So
I have to confess, I've never done that.
There you go. Rav Chaim Pelagi writes that he himself saw that he said he saw many miracles that were unnatural that occurred to him while he's writing his books. And Reb Shlomo Kluger writes that 25 well, leave aside where Reb Shlomo Kluger says, because whatever, it's very complicated to say right now. The Meiri in his introduction to his commentary to Pirkei Avot says we have a clear teaching about Rav Achai, the Rav Achai, who was the author of the Sheltos, Rav Achai Gaon. He had a son, and his son wasn't diligent in his studies. He didn't want to study, and so therefore he wrote on his behalf the Sefer She'iltos, so that on every Shabbos he'll be able to explain to him the known laws from the Talmud. So basically, let's just summarize some of the ideas we've said so far. That the last mitzvah of the Torah is the mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah, and even if you have a Torah scroll that you got from your ancestors, it's a mitzvah to write a new Torah scroll. But what is the main purpose of of having a Torah scroll is to study the laws of the Torah. That's why we have a Torah scroll. The main purpose is to keep it around you. So therefore, many of the Rishonim themselves wrote their own Torah scrolls as a source of a way of fulfilling this mitzvah. And not only that, there's an additional aspect to this mitzvah today, which is that you can purchase holy books as a way of fulfilling this mitzvah, and B, you can also write your own sefarim as an additional way of fulfilling this mitzvah. But the main mitzvah, obviously, is to write the Torah scroll. And if you do that, then the segula, it's a blessing for a long life. A lot of people today who are unable to write their own Torah scroll for themselves, what they do is they participate in the mitzvah of writing a Torah scroll. They spend make a gift towards the Torah scroll, towards the purchase of a Torah scroll. They do a letter. They write one letter in it. They they fix a Torah scroll because you can fulfill the mitzvah just by fixing one letter. So they write one letter and thereby help fix the Torah scroll. But the basic idea is that this is a great mitzvah because the Torah scroll is about creating. And so since the Torah is about creating, then we have to create our Torah. We have to create a Torah. I can tell you myself personally, okay, just speaking on a very personal note, that when you write a Torah scroll, that every letter becomes internalized. And it is like the Torah becomes, and even though we might think that the Torah is part of us, can't compare the way we feel connected to the Torah when it's written versus when we don't actually write it. A Torah scroll takes 1,000 hours to write, each 1,000 hours. So when you pour over every letter of the Torah, it's like you're pouring your heart and soul into each word, into each letter. So now when God willing, Hashem will give me the strength within a few weeks. Oh, I want to tell everybody something about this also. Within a few weeks, I'll, God willing, finish this Torah. That'll be my 8th Torah that I'll have completed. Let me just pause for a second here that I wrote. So just a couple of thoughts about the mitzvah of this verse. Ata kitvu lachem et hashir hazos. First, we'll go the like a counter voice. We'll hear about this from the Ger Rebbe, and then we'll see another thought from the Sefer HaDrashos. So the Rosh, so again, a lot of people rely on this Rosh, that he rules that nowadays that there's a lot of Torah scrolls that are just sitting there in the ark and not being used. And it's a mitzvah to fulfill it's better. The Rosh says that it's better to fulfill the mitzvah writing a Torah scroll through writing the oral Torah. This is the Ger Rebbe's here position is a minority position. But he says, but this is hinted to in the fact that it says Ata, and now write for yourselves this Torah. Ata atem tzrichim uchtov ashir zos. Nowadays you need to write this Torah, meaning the Torah, the written Torah. But in later generations, in different times, it's better to write the oral Torah. That's what the Ger Rebbe says. You know what? What happened was when COVID happened, and all of a sudden all the shul shut down, and everybody had to do their private minyanim. Everybody needed a Torah scroll, and you couldn't get a Torah scroll. You couldn't even find one, and they were you can't even get a sofer now to write you a Torah scroll. You have to wait. And you know what they go for now? Forget about it. If I told you, you'd pass out because it's so hard to even find a Torah scroll now. So now, when the Ger Rebbe says, but now there are so many Torah scrolls and they're just sitting there in the ark, I don't think that's true. I think that there are a lot of, nowadays, I'm saying in this situation, I think a lot of people are requiring. And also some people also should be aware that a lot of the Torah scrolls that are being used are not really kosher anymore, because what do people think? The life of a Torah scroll, it doesn't last forever. That after it depends on how it's written, but a lot of the ink begins to fade, the letters begin to crack. So Torah scrolls don't last forever. So otherwise there would be unlimited number of Torahs. But Torah scrolls, after several generations, probably need to be buried. So the Torah says, so it says in the pasuk, "Ata kitvu lachem et hashir hazos." Now you shall write for yourselves this Torah scroll. So the idea is that this is for you, not for others. That this is for your family and for your children. So it's very expensive, but I think that if every family, when they start out, this is just my theory, like people have a housing allowance that they save, that that they're going to save up to build a house. If they start putting away money when they become when they become newly married, they start putting away money, then they'll be able to afford a Torah scroll, make it a part of their life existence. You can imagine what kind of pride it is that you're able to buy a Torah scroll. The Talmud says the following situation: what do you do if you have a child who has, basically, let's say he gets some cash and you want to preserve the cash for this child? He's too young to be, he's an orphan and he's too young to be able to make decisions for himself. So what do you do with the money? So the Talmud says, we learned this in Baba Basra, you purchase for him a segula. A segula is a trust. So what do you purchase? I mean, this is in the time of the Talmud. What are you going to buy? A CD? What are you going to buy? Treasury bills? What do you buy for this child? What's the segula? So the Talmud says you buy him a Torah scroll, because the Torah scroll is something he can use while he's a child, and it grows in value. So that's if you want to preserve, the best way to preserve your family, the best way to preserve the connection to the faith is by purchasing a segula, and the best segula in the world is the Torah scroll. Okay, that's the mitzvah of writing a Torah scroll. Just wanted to say one more thought about this. I always like to look at the Baal then we'll go to the mitzvah of Hakel. But the Baal says about this, the Baal writes on this. Hold on, let me open it up. He says here, he just gives us a gematria. He says, now you shall write this Torah, and teach it to the children of Israel. And also he says, Sima bifiem, place it in their mouths, so that this song will be a witness for the children of Israel. So the Baal HaTurim has two commentaries on this. First, he says, "V'limdet b'nei Yisrael b'gematria hein Torah b'chtav." So the gematria of this phrase, "V'lamda et b'nei Yisrael," is equivalent to that of "This is the written Torah." This is the written Torah. And "Sima b'feim," place it in their mouth. What are you supposed to place in their mouth? The gematria of this phrase is that Talmud. That refers to the oral law or the Talmud. And so that's the idea of the Lamdas B'nai Yisrael, and Sima B'fneim is encompassing nowadays the written Torah and the oral Torah. One time I was with this muckety muck of the Jewish community, and he said to me, I was with muckety muck, very nice man, very, very muckety muck is not a derogatory term. It was a very, very nice man in the Jewish community. But he was a mover and a shaker. And this was maybe 25 years ago. And there are a lot of like major philanthropists there. Major, like some wedding, I don't even know whose wedding it was, I forget. And he said, all these philanthropists, but then he said, they're all the same. He wasn't impressed, but he said, but that one over there, that person is acquired the world to come. I said, well, what did he do? He said, his name is Schottenstein, and he sponsored the Talmud, the translation of the Talmud. That's Kona Olam Haba. He's acquired the world to come with that just tremendous sponsorship of the translation of the Talmud. That was his thought on what the gift of the Torah. So yes, it's a mitzvah to do written Torah, oral Torah. These are all part of the mitzvah, but the essence of the mitzvah is the written Torah. So now let's go to the mitzvah of Hakel. The mitzvah of Hakel. This is the mitzvah after every 7 years, after the sabbatical year, we're supposed to gather in the temple and listen to the king read the book of Devarim. This is the mitzvah. It says in chapter 31, verse 10. This is the second to last mitzvah in the Torah, 612. It's also related to the mitzvah of Torah study, because why are we gathering there in front of the king? We're gathering there to study Torah. So basically, the last two mitzvahs of the Torah are really about the study of Torah. And it says in this commandment, Moshe commanded them, saying, Mikate Sheva Shanim, at the end of the 7th year, B'moed Shnat HaShmitah, after the festival, B'chag HaSukkot, in the festival of Sukkot, B'vo Kol Yisrael Leiraot at Pnei Hashem Elokecha, all of Israel should come to see Hashem your God. B'makom Asher Yivchar, in the place that will be selected, Tikra et Torah Azot, you have to read the Torah. Neged Kol Yisrael Ba'ozneihem, opposite of all of Israel in their ears. So there's a mitzvah to gather and to read the Torah. Why? Hakel et ha'am, you have to gather the people. Hanashim v'anashim v'ata, the men, the women, and the children. The gercha asher b'sharecha, and stranger who is with you also has to come. L'man yishma'u, so they will hear. L'man yomudu, so they will study. V'yaru et Hashem Elokechem, and they will fear Hashem your God. V'shamru la'asot, and they will guard to do kol divrei Torah azot, and they'll guard to do all this Torah. So Rashi says, based upon the Gemara in Sota, that what does it mean you should read this Torah? Who's supposed to read? That is the king. Mitzvah, the king would read from the beginning of Eila Advarim, like it appears in Masechah Sota, and they would set up a platform of wood in the courtyard. And who would come? The men, the women, and the children. Why were the men coming? Lilmo, the men were coming to study. The women, in those days, the women didn't study Torah. So why nowadays, Baruch Hashem, they study many women, great women study Torah. So it says, Vanashim, but why in the time of the Torah were they supposed to come? Just lishmo, just to hear. Even though they're not studying, they're hearing it, and that's powerful. And why are the children coming? Lama ba, why are the children coming? So if anybody ever gets upset about kids coming to a service, here we see that the kids are supposed to come. What are the kids getting out of it? The parents are getting reward for bringing them. The parents are getting reward for bringing these children. So this is the mitzvah of Hakel, which nowadays is only upheld symbolically. And nowadays, what happens is every time there's a sabbatical year, I remember they gather at the kotel, and when they gather at the kotel, maybe it's a chief rabbi or somebody like that comes and reads the Torah. So the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah talks a little bit about this, and he says, the Rambam writes that the Gemara Chagiga says Ba'azneihem, that they have to come and listen. Who are the ones who are coming? Says Rabbi Tanchum, the Cheresh Ba'azno Achas, that if there's a deaf person who's missing one ear, he's not obligated the pilgrimage. As it says Ba'azneihem, and with their ears in the plural, meaning to say that since he doesn't have two ears, he's not obligated to make a pilgrimage. He's still allowed to, but he's not obligated. The Gemara says, but isn't the ears referring to the ears of Israel? So the Gemara says, no, that comes from all of Israel. If it comes from all of Israel, I might have thought that even though they can't hear, so therefore it says that Ba'azneihem, that means if he hears. So the Gemara says, no, we learned it out from L'man Yishma'u. And then it says in the Gemara continues, gather up the men, the women, the children, and the babies. So why are the children coming? So we had said the children are coming to bring reward to those who bring them. What age are they supposed to come? This is another question. What age should the children come to the service? What age is appropriate? So here the Ramban writes, and that refers to a child who's old enough to understand what's going on. But if the child is not old enough to understand, then we don't get this. Then there's no reward for bringing him, because then the child is just a nuisance, and all the child is doing is causing problems. However, he then writes that maybe it's not like that, because the Gemara says to bring reward to those who bring them. That means that even if they are not reached the aging of understanding anything, you're still obligated. So the Turi Evan writes, if this obligation to bring the child to the Hakel ceremony is an obligation on the father or the mother or on the court. And if it was an obligation on the court, then if there's a person who's not a child, who's an orphan, the court is obligated. It's like, who's the obligation to educate the Jewish child in Torah? Is it obligation of the father, the mother, or the community? If it's the obligation of the community, if the child can't afford the day school, and he wants to go, then it's the community's obligation to make sure he can go. So what does it mean when it says in this idea, but what obligation? This obligation that the child is obligated to come is when he reaches the age of chinuch. But until what age? Until what age is the community's obligation to support the child coming? So this is a question. Obviously, it's going to change with communal norms. Like nowadays, it's expected, obviously, that everyone goes to high school. But in the time of, like 80 years ago, it wasn't always the case. So that's something that's going to be expected, that is going to change with communal norms. Nowadays, like for example, that it's expected that many kids will go to Israel to study in yeshiva for a year after they finish their high school. So is that the expectation? Is that also a communal responsibility to make sure that every child has that? This is a question that I think communities are wrestling with. So why is the mitzvah of Hakel right after the mitzvah of the sabbatical year? And that's very simple, because what are you supposed to be doing with the sabbatical year? You're supposed to be doing the sabbatical year. You're supposed to be studying Torah. Why else do we have a sabbatical year? You think we have a sabbatical year to sit around and play backgammon? Obviously not. The purpose of the sabbatical year is to sit around and study Torah. So that's what the Akedat Yitzchak. So he says after a year of rest from physical work, then you're going to be able to remove then it's the most appropriate time that the words of Torah will enter into your heart. And say the year of the sabbatical year is supposed to be meant for us to be a year of spiritual introspection, spiritual growth. So then right at the end of that, we're going to come to the temple, and the words of the Torah will be able to enter into our heart. And so that's, I'm going to read to you the words of Meshech Chochmah. When a full year of prohibited work in the field and the vineyard ends, the people are basically rested from the physical labor. And so therefore the command comes specifically then. Now they're ready to go back to work. They miss it. At that specific point, we want to delay them a little bit and read to them the Torah of a God, so that they can learn from this a Musar Haskel, a improvement idea or a spiritual idea, that at the time that a person is desiring this great desire for the physical, that's when you should draw yourself closer to the Torah mitzvah. So person is desiring for the spiritual, physical work. After a year of lacking, being out there in the field, working the farms, he wants to get back to it. That specifically is the time that we're supposed to do a little bit more Torah study. Another idea here comes from the Kuyakar. I'll read the Kuyakar. He says the most appropriate time for peace and harmony is the year of the sabbatical, because that's a year of economic equality, that the poor and the rich meet together, because nobody's allowed to take more than they need into their homes. The farms are open and the debts are released, and nobody owns any produce, and the land will be rested for you to eat and for you to serve. And everybody, all your servants, everybody is equal on that year. And that causes, without doubt, that's going to cause peace and harmony. Everybody's going to be equal. Because the origin of fights, it's everybody says, this is mine, this is mine. Everybody says, this is all mine, this is all mine. But in sabbatical year, everybody's saying, this is everybody's. And so therefore everybody is equal that year. And that's the concept of peace. And so therefore we come right then on the holiday of Sukkot, that everybody goes out from its fixed home and its dwelling in a sukkah. And so there, in that time where everybody has this feeling of harmony and equality, therefore the king is commanded to speak about this. Hakel, he comes together and he talks about unity at this specific moment where there's this purpose of unity, this sense of peace in the air. And the king reminds everybody this is the purpose of the Torah, to bring us together, and reads to us these words at once. That's the beautiful concept of the Kli Yakar. All right, I want to stop. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to address them.